There you go. I feel like that's sufficient time for the stragglers. So if you're happy, Jenny, I think we'll likely kick off. This is being recorded as well, so hopefully there'll be an opportunity for those who do arrive late to pick up on some of the bits that we've discussed early on. But firstly, I just want to say bore da pawb, and thank you for joining us for this important discussion. I'm Owen Derbyshire, I'm the Chief Executive of Keep Wales Tidy, and I'll be chairing today's session. So heddiw byddwn ni'n trafod sut orau gyflwyno cynllun dychwelydernus yng Nghymru, a dwi'n falch iawn o weld gymaint ohonoch chi sydd wedi dod i ymuno ar alwad, i gyd yn amlwg mor awyddus i glywed mwy am yr rhaglen pwysig hwn. So today we're going to be discussing the delivery of a successful deposit return scheme, or DRS, as lots of you will know it, in Wales. This session will be recorded and is part of a series of events which are taking place in both England and Wales. And I've got to say, it's really encouraging to see so many people join us today for what is an important and timely discussion, as we all know. So lots of you will know that Keep Wales Tidy and our volunteers have been championing DRS for a number of years. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about this important issue over the course of the next hour or so. So, taking us on this journey will be an expert panel with an international flavour, very exotic, which should give us all an opportunity to understand a bit more about their experiences with DRS, the lessons learned, and what that could mean for Wales too. So the panellists are Jenni Hume, UK and Ireland Director at Reloop UK, got Jemma Bere, who's Keep Wales Tidy's policy lead, Jānis Brizga, chair of the Latvian NGO Green Liberty and a researcher at the University of Latvia, and Bere Kiely, who is the circular economy lead at the Republic of Ireland Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications. Great job title. And quite a panel as well. So there will be an opportunity for any questions at the end, and I'm happy to take those questions in either English or Welsh, and feel free to use the chat function, which you should all have access to as we go along through the rest of these presentations. So without further ado, I'm going to pass straight on over to our first speaker, Jenni Hume, the Director for the UK and Ireland at Reloop UK. Jenni.
Thank you very much, Owen. I'm just going to share my screen so that I can hopefully share this presentation with you. So I'm Jenni Hume. As Owen said, I'm Reloop's UK and Ireland Director. Reloop is an international organisation, and we work with governments, industry and the third sector to lead the global transition to a circular economy for all resources. But we do have specific expertise in deposit return systems for drinks containers, and so we're following the progress of this policy across the UK with interest. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon, with special thanks to our international speakers whose expertise I'm really looking forward to hearing. So as I say, our team at Reloop has worked in the UK on the issue of deposit return systems for bottles and cans since 2008. For much of that time, we've worked alongside Keep Wales Tidy and Friends of the Earth Cymru, who we're pleased to be partnering with today. The Welsh Government's intention to introduce deposits by October 2025, alongside parallel systems planned for Scotland, England and Northern Ireland, is a reform that's absolutely essential to boosting economic, social and environmental well-being up and down the country. Of course, Wales already has a very impressive record for recycling, with a national average of 65% across all materials. The lower hanging fruit has been tackled, and so quite sensibly, policymakers have identified that the next step is a commitment to a comprehensive deposit return scheme that includes drinks products in all sizes of container, sold in a broad range of materials. Every 2 years, Reloop publishes a global deposit book, which collates data from more than 40 deposit return schemes around the world. And our data shows that a well-designed deposit scheme can bring collection rates of drinks containers up to 90%. So without deposits, there's no other proven system that can bridge the gap, which is why extended producer responsibility policies on their own simply can't achieve the same results. And as we know, under EU law, 77% of plastic bottles must now be collected separately, and this is going to rise to 90% by 2029. So the planned deposit return scheme will ensure that Wales keeps pace with countries as they reach 90% recycling rates, but it must be delivered on time in order to prevent Wales and the rest of the UK falling behind these other countries. Welsh policymakers have also recognised that since deposit return is a form of producer responsibility, the current cost of recovery and recycling will shift from local authorities onto producers. This will save councils money and incentivise producers to minimise their infrastructure costs. The system proposed for Wales will match the ambition of other recently started European systems. In the last few years alone, we've seen systems launch in Latvia, Slovakia, Romania, Malta, and Hungary. This table shows the scope of those systems and what's included in each of them. And I haven't included Ireland here because I'm going to leave Bernie to go into detail to talk about Ireland. Also, in the next 18 months, we expect to see new systems launched in Poland, Greece, Austria, and Portugal. Many deposit return schemes in the world include infrastructure for both single-use bottles and cans of all materials, as well as refillable and even some plastic refill bottles. And this is important because glass is the most carbon-intensive of the materials used for drinks containers, and even recycling it isn't the perfect answer to the problem. For example, for every 10% increase in recycled glass used, energy emissions are reduced by just 2.5%. Refillable glass, however, can reduce emissions by 85%. And we see in Germany, which has the world's largest deposit return system for single-use bottles and cans, they sell 42% of their beverages in refillable containers. And as a result, Germany litters, landfills, or incinerates just 10 containers per person per year, while the equivalent figure in the UK is 115. The German system uses the same infrastructure to separate bottles for those into refill and those for recycling. So a system looking to move towards refill requirements in the future would be more cost efficient if glass bottles were included from the start. So for those who call for a consistent or interoperable system across the UK, the best and most efficient way to achieve this would be for the whole of the UK to level up to meet the scope of the Welsh system, with glass bottles included across the UK from the start. We know we have primary legislation already in place, but regulations now need to be laid in order for a system operator to be appointed, and there must be no further delay in completing these steps. We are really encouraged that UK Labour's 2019 manifesto recognised the ambition of the Welsh Government's plans and said that a UK Labour government will learn from Wales' example and will also back deposit return schemes. So as we approach the next UK general election, we hope to see legislation laid at both Westminster and in Cardiff in order to deliver a comprehensive deposit return scheme in the timeline we need to help achieve our climate, waste reduction and nature goals. I'm now delighted to pass over to Jemma Bere from Keep Wales Tidy, who will give us more detail on the context of deposit return in Wales and the rest of the UK. Thank you.
Brilliant. So, hi everyone. My name's Jemma, and I'm the Policy and Research Manager at Keep Wales Tidy. Keep Wales Tidy is an independent environmental charity with a vision for a beautiful Wales cared for and enjoyed by all. Many of you will hopefully know us by the support that we give to thousands of committed and dedicated wonderful volunteers across the country who undertake litter picks in their communities and neighbourhoods, and undertake various environmental improvements for nature on their doorstep. You might not be as familiar with some of the work that we do on behaviour change. So I myself am a behaviour change practitioner, not a behavioural psychologist, I should point out. So I can tell you what works. I can't necessarily tell you why. I first approached the concept of a deposit return scheme by asking one fundamental question. Will it change people's behaviour? Will it promote positive environmental behaviours? And the answer, resoundingly from all of the global evidence from the schemes all over the world that Jenny mentioned, is a resounding yes. So I've been working with Jenny and other NGOs on the concept of a deposit return scheme in Wales now for over 10 years. In fact, it was over 6 years ago that we had a commitment from Michael Gove back in 2018 to introduce a deposit return scheme in the UK. And the current timeline is for a deposit return scheme to be introduced in 2025. International evidence from the most recently launched systems in Latvia and Slovakia, for example, show that this is a perfectly adequate timeframe in order to get a deposit return scheme up and running. We'll hear a little bit more about that from our international speakers later on. In this time, Reloop's data shows that an estimated 57 billion plastic, metal and glass containers could have been saved from wastage. In Wales specifically, we've been undertaking street litter surveys since 2007. Our litter surveys monitor trends of litter on our streets every year, every local authority every year in Wales. It's a significant data set, which is only comparable really with data in Scotland, who have a similar methodology for measuring litter. And over the past decade, there are really two key trends. Firstly, that litter is generally decreasing, but the types of litter have changed, with food and drink on the go increasing in prevalence. And you can see from this graph that food and drink litter is really quite persistent, remains consistent or is increasing. Whilst other types of litter, so smoking litter, for example, has decreased. There are a number of reasons for this, but the simplest way to kind of explain it is simply that littering levels mirrors consumption levels. If you have a rise in single-use consumption of an item, you will see that item more littered. And this is true of every area of Wales, rural, urban, across all types of socioeconomic groups. It's true despite our fantastic record of curbside recycling in the household. So we're brilliant at recycling at home. We're not very good at doing it outside. The same is true from data in Scotland, so this is not necessarily unique to Wales, and the same is true of Marine Conservation Society Beachwatch data, who measure litter levels on beaches. They find similar trends. In terms of DRS materials, apologies, you might not be able to see those numbers particularly clearly, but I'll walk you through it. DRS is deposit drinks containers, sorry, are by far the most persistent items that we see across Wales. So the darker shades on this map are the higher the prevalence. Because of their size and the makeup, they've got a particularly negative impact on wildlife and social and economic well-being. They are designed by their very nature to be lightweight and transportable, which is great for production logistics, but it's a disaster if they actually escape the waste systems that they're intended for. There is obviously a correlation between where we find them and population density, but that's not always the case. And actually, we find quite a lot of drinks containers. They travel rivers and roads and pathways. There's a very high correlation between tourism and where we find a significant prevalence of drinks containers. And this data, this is just looking at streets. So when we look at Marine Conservation Society data, they found plastic bottles on 70% of beaches, cans on 64%. When they've done cleanups inland, so rivers and parks, as part of their sea cleanup campaign, you're looking at close to 94% and 93%. So it's a really persistent and widespread issue that we really need to tackle. As a behaviour practitioner, we can prove some local behavioural interventions to manage littering, and we have done this successfully on a number of local areas in various local authorities through our Carry Cymru programme. But we also know that the real solution is to look at prevention and to implement a scheme which is going to fundamentally affect our waste culture and the way that we all think about waste and that entire relationship. I wanted to talk a little bit about glass specifically because it's been an area of contention and it's had a kind of unjustifiable amount of media coverage, I think. So for background, let's remember that the UK government's own impact assessment showed that a net benefit from the inclusion of glass in a UK-wide deposit return scheme. It was the UK government that rolled back on this. So the Welsh government remains committed to the original principle of an all-in deposit return scheme that included glass. As far as littered glass is concerned, oh, sorry, this is the picture. So at the top of that key there, you'll see the blues and greens, low level of glass, with the reds and yellows being highly with a higher prevalence. Again, there is a slight correlation between population density, but this is not always the case. We suspect probably the fact that alcohol is quite often in glass bottles to be the reason for this. Glass litter has more than doubled over the past few years in Wales. We don't know why, but that is certainly the case from our surveys. And marine conservation data shows a 74% presence as part of their cleanup, around 54% of beaches in the top 10 most littered items. Broken glass found on public land requires local authorities to deal with it as if it's a hazardous substance. So in most cases, that means that a local authority needs to respond to broken glass being reported within 1 to 8 hours. And that alone is a significant cleanup cost. But there are also links, of course, with glass and antisocial behaviour, and of course harm to pets and wildlife, as any dog owners will testify when you're out walking. A YouGov poll in October shows 66% of people were in favour of glass being part of a deposit return scheme. Jenny mentioned that glass is the most carbon intensive of the materials used for drinks containers, and recycling is not the solution here. Wales had an ambition to be the first refill nation in the world, to improve drinking water access in public spaces. So why stop there? I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of glass specifically. That's not what we're here for. But I do want to invite a couple of questions around glass and the deposit return scheme. Firstly, if glass is not included in deposit return scheme, what is the mechanism for mandating refill and reuse? If glass is not included in a deposit return scheme, how do we address the emissions of the sector? How do we stop producers from changing from plastic to glass in order to avoid costs and increasing that associated energy and carbon costs when we're on a mission to reach net zero? Lastly, I wanted to address the actual ambition in the title of this webinar. For Wales specifically, it's not an exaggeration to say that when it comes to tackling waste, plastics, and indeed many other environmental issues, we are the most ambitious country in the UK. We are, in fact, world leading in many areas. We were the first country to introduce a single-use carrier bag charge, and we did that comprehensively. We have a more ambitious single-use plastics ban than any of the other countries in the UK. We introduced the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act back in 2015, which literally embeds the principle of prevention and long-term decision-making into our decisions and policies. We were the first in the UK, I think a very long time ago actually, to actually start talking about and setting out this journey towards a more circular economy and making that transition. And we are, of course, world leading when it comes to curbside recycling. Unfortunately, this does not extend to recycling outside of the home, which is why a deposit return scheme is needed. A deposit return scheme represents a way to meet all of these ambitions, to reduce littering, increase the quality of secondary materials, and literally move Wales beyond recycling. Importantly, for our many thousands of volunteers across the country who are constantly at the front end of tackling litter, a deposit return scheme is a visible manifestation of producer responsibility. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jemma. Both presentations so far have led to lots of different questions from me, but I will reserve them until the very end. So for now, we'll just hand over to Jānis. He'll talk a bit more about the Lativan scheme and his experience with it.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone. So my name is Jānis Brizga. I work for an environmental group in Latvia and Riga called Green Liberty. Let me just share the screen. Do you see the my presentation now? Okay. Yeah, we are working with climate and lifestyles and resource consumption issues for more than 30 years, and deposit refund system has been on our agenda for quite some time. We've been actually advocating for introduction of such a system for 20 years, so it took quite a long time for the system to come in force. And I can say that the allies and opposition to the system introduction has been changing throughout time. So at some point, the producers were the ones who we were kind of cooperating with to introduce the system, and then the kind of obstacles changed, and we started to more work with retailers who were interested to get the packaging collected and fixed. But I can say that the main reason why we have the deposit refund system in place was EU regulations, which put additional targets for drink beverage collection. So these were the main reasons why do we have the deposit refund system introduced. And it's also that Latvia, together with Estonia and Lithuania, are rather small economies, and also for businesses to have a similar system in 3 Baltic states is beneficiary. So Estonia has been first introducing a deposit refund system more than 10 years ago. And Lithuania, I think it was 4 years ago, and Latvia introduced its system 2 years ago. We are covering plastic bottles, aluminum cans, and glass bottles, mostly for soft drinks, as well as beer and cider and some light alcohol cocktail drinks. So these are all included as part of the system. And there is ongoing discussion to widen the scope of the deposit system in a coming future, but that's still not clear. There is a widespread network of collection system. It's both using the collection machines, you can say so, as well as manual collection in some rural shops. So depending on the size of the retail place, then that's a solution which retailers choose by themselves. Now a little bit more about the litter collection survey, which we did in Latvia for last 3 years. So the first one survey was done in 2021, before the introduction of the deposit refund system, and then the following 2 years. As you can see, Latvia has a rather long coastline, and that's where the place where we've been doing the monitoring, using doing it for 17 coastal access points. So that's more or less the usually the kind of parking place or bigger public space for people accessing the beaches, and that's been the sites which we were monitoring for these 3 years. In 2022, we also added additional parameter for monitoring the percentage of deposit labeled on identified litter items. So they were looking specifically for the labels on the litter. I will just walk you through some of these results which we have. Generally, we can see that the littering material related to the deposit refund system has decreased by half. No? It's not been evenly distributed for different sites. The sites are different in terms of what kind of people are gathering there. So we can see that some of the sites which attract more foreign tourists, for example, the decrease has been slower, not so steep. I can think that maybe the tourists don't pay so much attention or to the places they visit, and don't take so much care about that. But it's also that they might not spend so much time and don't want to look for the places where to return the deposit back. So the deposit fee is 10 euro cents, which is not very high. And for some of the people, that might seem to be too little motivation to actually get engaged and get involved. But for other sites, the decrease has been very significant. There are generally most of the sites we see the decrease in deposit packaging from 40 to 90%. And similar results are actually monitored by another campaign, MySea, where they are actually monitoring the different waste on the beaches themselves. But that's more complicated because there is also a lot of waste which is washed out from the sea, so from ships and other countries, and the picture is more complicated. It's a lot of fishing gear and things like that. So we were just mostly looking on these exit sites to the coastal beaches. What we can see if we compare the different types of packaging, for some of the glass bottles, we don't see the deposit labels, because it's usually the paper labels which are on the glass bottles, and they are washed away by weather and rain, and you can easily lose them if they are left out in the environment. Rather higher collection rates also, and higher the number of litter on the beaches are for plastic packaging. For aluminium cans, we see a decrease by half in most of the years compared. But aluminium cans are the ones who have lowest return to the deposit system, because they might be damaged for return or smashed, so that they're not always returned back to the deposit refund system. Altogether, return rate for last year was 80%. So 80% of all the beverage packaging going through the system was returned back, and the target for this year is 84%. So there is an increasing target, reaching 90% in few years. So that's a kind of part of the government regulation. Latvia has also proportionally quite a lot of glass bottles. Most of the beer is sold in glass bottles, so that's big part of the deposit return system, and that's included. We also have specific target. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's 25% of glass bottles which should be refilled. So it's not only collection but also a refill target, which for us I think it's very important to increase the refill rates, because that's most environmentally friendly way of dealing with the glass. Yeah, these are my slides, and I will be happy to respond to any questions if they come later. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you, Jānis. Can I just say it's really encouraging to see the impact there and the immediate impact as well, because it's quite a short-term sort of trial really so far, isn't it? So it's no, some really interesting stats there, and thank you for sort of talking us through that, Jānis. It's brilliant. So we'll now hand over to Bernie, our final panelist, and then we'll have a chance at the end to answer any questions. So you can either use the Q&A tab or the chat, and then we'll be able to go through those once we've gone through all of these presentations. So for now, Diolch, Bernie. Take it away.
Thank you very much, Owen. Hi, everybody, and I'm Bernie Kiely, and I head up the Circular Economy Materials Management Division here in the Department of the Environment in Ireland. I'm speaking from our office in Wexford, so down in the southeast coast, not too far away from Wales. On a clear day, you can see Wales from some of the beaches and some of the mountains around. So feel very much like a neighbour. So I understand that, you know, the point that you're at, you're probably more interested in how our scheme got going. It started on the 1st of February this year, so still very much early days for us. But by way of background, a bit like Jānis, the Single-Use Plastics Directive was critical to that final push into action, because similarly here the NGOs had been advocating for deposit and return scheme for 20 years, and there was always a reason not to do it for, I suppose, cost to business in the first instance, and relatively good recycling performance also undermined the business case for it. What else were you going to achieve? So those new targets that came in under the Single-Use Plastics Directive were critical. We incorporated the provisions of the SUP directive into our 2020 programme for government and our national waste policy, which both came out in 2020, and these are all online if anybody would like to see them. Culminating then ultimately in November 2021 in new regulations to establish the national scheme and setting out who's going to do, like, what kind of an entity was going to do it and what was within their area of responsibility. So we went for something like an extended producer responsibility scheme, and set out there what the standards to be met were, which materials were going to be in scope, and now we didn't set the deposit rate. In fact, we didn't even just dictate which ones were going to be in scope, but we set the ground rules, if you like, and then put it out to industry, effectively saying, after a certain amount of time, you wouldn't be allowed to put your product on the market unless you were in this scheme. So we have one extended producer responsibility scheme for packaging in Ireland. It's run by Repack, and it was really a subsidiary, if you like, of Repack that provided the executive know-how to put the scheme together. So on one hand, we had the producers and retailers being brought together by some of the employment representative bodies. So IBEC is the main one in Ireland, the Irish Business and Employers Confederation. So they engage with producers and retailers around the new requirement. Obviously, all these people are competitors and are
Looks like Bernie's frozen.
To force them into a conversation together, and at the same time then Repack, the EPR for packaging, did a lot of the legwork in terms of how does the DRS work, and there's very little we invented for the first time. They went around Europe, they spoke to all the schemes that are out there already and saw what worked and what didn't work. So ultimately, I suppose in July 2022, we had a proposal from a new company called Return, pretty imaginative, and they put the business case together as to how it would work, what would be in it, the kind of level of deposits, and how long they would need to get ready for go live. And so the long and the short of it was that it's for plastic bottles and cans only. We have left the door open to other materials being added, but we felt it was likely to be more successful the simpler we made it at the beginning. And ultimately they came back with deposit rates that they felt would be high enough to incentivize a return, but not so high that it would put people off buying the products in the first instance. And what they came up with was a 15-cent and a 25-cent deposit rate for, I'll get this right now, for basically 2 litre bottles were going to be 25 cent, and anything below that 15 cents. So your standard kind of single serving of drinks would be 15 cents. So this is what they came back with. Apparently Ireland is a world leader in terms of the multi-packs, the sale of multi-packs. And so they were very conscious of the price impact of somebody buying 8, 12 cans of, bottles of, you know, and what that would mean in terms of at the till. So we largely went with the proposal that it came with, and that was that they would have a go live date in 2024. So back in July 2022, that seemed like a really long way away politically, and anybody who was in favour of DRS agreed with that. On the other hand, the producers and retailers felt that it was really, really soon. So it was trying to strike the balance between the two. And the scheme officially opened up, if you like, for registrations in November 2022. So that's when kind of the backroom stuff started to happen and go live for producers and retailers. That's when they came on board and the process started to become real for them. And what was forecast was about the 2 billion mark. We're talking about a market per year for bottles and cans, and a pretty even split, just to give you an idea of what we were dealing with. So basically, yes, it went live on the 1st of February as proposed. We are now in what we call a transition phase. This is just a grab from a presentation from Return the Company, just to show you some of the complexity involved in terms of a 4-month, moving out of old stock and moving in of new stock, and all those complexities around what is a logo, the barcodes, international barcodes, national barcodes. Because on the island of Ireland, we just have one scheme, but up in Northern Ireland, there is no scheme. We have to be conscious of products being brought over borders. Ultimately, we'd really welcome deposit and return schemes across the UK as well, where there was interoperability between the schemes. So that's an ambition and a principle that we're all bought into. But just coming back to this transition period, you can see that where we are now, and the 16th of March will be coming up very soon. From that point, then you'll see more logoed stock coming onto the market, and then by June 2024, there should only be stock on board. So we're still like in very early days. We know what's coming back, but we don't have the data from the producers yet as to what they've put on the market. That'll start coming in over the next month. But I can show you some figures later, just to show you how things are going. So the next few slides I'll go to quickly, just give you an understanding of an insight into once Return started up and how they engaged. These were the kind of things these are the kind of webinars and workshops. The education piece for retailers was phenomenal, throughout the year. All kinds of roadshows held to try and get their attention in the first instance, and then educate them as to what their obligations were going to be. The multiples, very easy to deal with. They have a big staff. They have an executive team, the sustainability officers who have capacity. It's the smaller independents who were very difficult to reach, and even at the time of go live, some shop owners still said they had never heard of it before. So I mean, really kind of a diverse market, and some very difficult to deal with. This is just a sample of some of the brand assets that were created by Return as well, to hang on shelves, just to get the brand out there through the big comms campaign. So to come back to then the go live date on the 1st of February, you can see there's our Minister of State, Oisin Smith, holding the bottle, and there's the CEO of Return at the machine. That's what the machine looks like. They're very similar to the ones you'll see across Europe. And the machines are bought by the retailers, and they cost about €15,000 each. There's about 2,000 machines across the country. And smaller retailers, if they can make that investment, if they don't think it's worth their while, they can take stuff over the counter, but there's only about 200 shops have agreed to do that. A lot of shops have stayed out of it because they just don't want the hassle of handling dirty bottles and cans. and they don't see it worth their while. At the same time, though, the pull of having people come back in and claim their deposit is obviously very strong for footfall purposes, commercial purposes. So, you know, smaller retailers have been very vocal about feeling left out if there isn't a space for them. So that's something that we're kind of keeping under review. And you can see in this a very poor scale map of Ireland here, but basically, you know, there's pretty good coverage. But as we see the figures coming back now, that'll become, we'll be zooming in on that a lot more and trying to address any kind of, you know, white spots, let's call them, that we might have in terms of cover. But all that data will come from the RVMs and the producers, and Return will put that all together. So there's some figures that we just got this morning by the 10th of March. This is all cumulative. We're looking at, we've already taken back over 5.6 million containers, and that breaks down kind of roughly between cans and bottles. Cans just a little bit ahead of it there. And you can see there's about 1.9 million transactions involved in that, at so many different premises, and over 2,000 individual reverse vending machines. Yeah, so that is it from me. I know you'd like to leave time for questions, so I won't take up any more time, but happy to respond to any questions you have.
That's wonderful, Bernie. Thank you very much. I do have one question. So firstly, I'll just open up the floor to everyone else. So as you know, we've got the chat function. We've also got a very fancy Q&A function, which should pop up on my screen if anyone's got any burning questions. But one thing I wanted to ask you directly, Bernie, if that's okay. You touched on the footfall question, because obviously that's been considered as a benefit to businesses who do sign up for the schemes to get people back through the door. Is that being tracked at the minute in Ireland at the minute, just to see how many people are coming back through, just to try and make that business case a little bit stronger?
It's not data that we have at the moment, but somebody did mention data coming from, perhaps it might have been Estonia actually, where I think there was a 25% rate, if you like, of, you know, the reason why people said they were coming to the shop included having a return facility at that shop. So that was being regarded as, you know, a very significant pull to shops to facilitate the return.
Fantastic. That's very good. Yeah, Bernie. So I'm not seeing any questions come through just yet, but there is one thing, only because we've got insider knowledge on some of this, that I wanted to sort of ask Jemma about directly, because one of the hot topics in Wales has been digital DRS, and that being a potential avenue for rolling out the scheme. And I know that it's just by coincidence, I can assure you all, it happened in Jemma's local area as well. So you've had some first-hand experience. But could you just talk a little bit about digital DRS and how you see that being a potential solution, or, you know, some of the challenges with it, perhaps?
Yeah, I know this is a so-called digital DRS where the deposit is kind of done. It's via an app. So it's like a technologically focused recycling incentive scheme, I guess. And the pilot is testing the return rates via the household recycling scheme. So like Wales has got a fantastic record of household recycling. And yes, by utter coincidence, it moved around quite a few times, but it ended up in my town in Brecon in Powys. And I had an open mind about it, so I downloaded the app and all the various kind of bits that went with it. So there's stickers for your curbside recycling, and then you have a unique barcode on your phone. My personal experience was that I found it quite effortful. I would have concerns if it was anything but an additional kind of complementary option on top of a traditional deposit return scheme. I can see why people like it. There's less infrastructure involved. But what I found was that I don't know if it's because recycling at home is such an automatic behavior. It takes seconds, and you're adding about 3 different steps in between, you know, scanning and then kind of putting it into the correct container. So it felt like a huge amount of effort. And from a behavioral perspective, I don't think that is working. What I ended up with was a load of bottles on my side, which would have been a lot easier just to take down to a return point, rather than scan, you know, in your home. So yeah, my experience wasn't that positive. I'd be worried if that was considered a solution over and above proven deposit return schemes. And I think there's a very good reason why all of these countries around the world are opting for the traditional proven DRS as opposed to the digital infrastructure. So I also think it puts quite a lot of onus on the curbside collection teams, which I think is not the way forward. We need to take away from that whole concept that it's a local authorities' responsibility to recycle to consumers and producers. So I think it puts the onus on the wrong place in the wrong people. That's my personal experience, and I know I found there was a lot of people in the community, a lot of friends and family that I spoke to who didn't even get round to downloading it because they just thought it just seemed really complicated. It's not, I should say, it's a simple process, but it felt very, very effortful and burdensome, psychologically or behaviourally speaking. Anyway, that was my experience.
Very good. Jemma. It does sound like anything we can do to the success of both one in Latvia and Ireland seem to be based on the sort of frictionless of the process as well, isn't it? About making it easy, making it familiar. And if we're going to drive that behaviour change, then it needs to be as simple as possible, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Jenny, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. I have a question for both Jānis and Bernie. Jānis, I was going to ask you, just kind of colloquially as like a citizen and a consumer, how did it feel when you transitioned into having a deposit return system? And did it just generally feel like people embraced it quite easily? Were there any teething problems? Just kind of fascinated to know, because, you know, sometimes we hear that we're kind of uniquely different in the UK and it's going to be so difficult for us. That's one of the arguments not to introduce a deposit return. And I'd just be really interested to hear from you, where it's obviously been in place and it's so successful, getting great return rates. You can see the impact of the reduction of litter already. So I'd be really interested to hear that. And Bernie, I wondered if you could talk more about the exemptions process, because you mentioned that some small shopkeepers are not involved. And I wondered if that's because they chose to opt out, or if there's a certain like de minimis of floor size where they're not included and they would have to opt in, because I think that's one of the big discussions around what's best practice. So yes, those are both of my questions.
Should we ask Jānis? Are you happy to answer the first?
I can start. Yeah. I think people were rather familiar with the system, especially those people who've been traveling to Scandinavian countries or just neighboring Estonia or Lithuania or Germany, where they have seen, and they didn't know why such a system doesn't exist in Latvia. So I think that there was good reception by the public. I think one of the if we can call it mistakes was that first half a year we had this transitional period where not all so that it was voluntary for companies, for producers to label their products with the deposit mark, and then on the same shelf you could have bottles which has a deposit label, or the next beer bottle which was without it, because it was allowed for just transition so that the producers don't have to change their labels, no? And that was confusing, because then people didn't really understand why is this bottle labeled and this one is not. But yeah, after half a year, that's changed, and now everything is under the same system. There have been also surveys showing that people recognize it as a positive thing. We also did a survey before the introduction of the system, where around 80% of people said that we have to. They would be happy to have such a system in place in Latvia. So I think it's been received rather well. And after in the first year, there was also quite a high collection rates, even taking into account that half a year was this mixed system where not everything was included in the deposit return system.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jānis.
Yeah, so the exemptions apply to retailers when it comes to take back. And what that means is, okay, everybody's selling the goods through a retail environment has to charge the deposit, but not everybody has to be a take back point for the empties. And the threshold that we set down was 250 square meters, which is quite generous, really. And so those shops did need to register with return, but and then they could apply for formal exemption. Then they had to put a sign up in their window to say, I can sell it, but I don't have to take it back, I'm exempt. And then obviously the coffee shop and restaurant sector, a few of those, I suppose, that would sell bottles and cans to, sit-in customers, they have the choice whether to charge the deposit or not. And so either they're saying, I'll charge the deposit, then you're free to walk out the door with it, or I won't charge the deposit, but you leave your things behind and I'll collect them and then I'll redeem the deposit. So that's the kind of the approach, and it would depend on the individual operator which would suit them best to do. So it's trying to show some flexibility to allow them to get involved. We are hoping though that we will get more retailers coming on board, that some are just kind of sitting back waiting for things to settle down and see how it develops and see what the impacts are like in terms of their footfall, but also maybe others who have experience of taking back over the counter. Then some of the smaller shops, we would like to encourage them to get reverse vending machines as well, and there is some money available from return. The producers themselves have put a grant together which will subsidize the cost of a reverse vending machine for the smaller operators, just to help them get established.
Wonderful. Thank you, Bere. That sounds like a very pragmatic approach, very sensible. So I'm not seeing any other questions. So unless our panelists want to ask anything, I think we're coming up to the end of this session. So what that means is all that's left for me to do now is to say diolch yn fawr iawn for everyone for attending. I hope you do agree with me that it's a really, really valuable session on an important and a timely topic. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope that you did too. It is really clear to me that there's a huge opportunity here, and it just works. We've heard so many different examples all over the world about this stuff just being put in place, and a year or two later, the impact is incredible. Jemma talked about Keep Wales Tidy sort of perspective on it as it relates to streets, cleanliness, wildlife, and sort of community well-being, and all of this stuff really, really matters, more so now than ever as well. So DRS seems like something we should all be championing and pushing for as well. So to any policymakers or NGOs or people who work in that world, keep the faith and keep on pushing, and it's really, really important that we keep doing so. But if you haven't had your fill of DRS just yet, we are going to be hosting another event at the Senedd on the 24th of April from 11:30 onwards. There we're going to be joined by some industry representatives as well, who are going to talk to us a little bit about how DRS could work for them. Invitations are going to be sent out shortly. So if you have any questions in the meantime, please don't hesitate to get in touch. I'm sure all panelists will be more than happy to hear from you. So for now, though, I just want to say thank you again to all of our wonderful panelists. It's been brilliant to hear from you all, and thank you all for joining as well. Diolch and hwyl fawr.